And that's a big reason that Sarah and her team have been so helpful on this is because,
Yes.
yeah, you can't use logged in information and all this great information you do have about somebody, but what you have is campaign segments.
Mm.
And you have information that you're allowed to use about people without identifying them personally. But I know that you are a member of this plan, that you're over 65 years old, that these are some of the needs based on who you are in our marketing campaigns. And so that's been really helpful to bring your team in for that.
Welcome, and thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Sitecore Water Cooler, the casual conversation podcast dedicated to covering all things related to Sitecore, including product updates, implementation insights, getting the most out of your Sitecore investment, and more. I'm your co-host today, Maggie Burke, Sitecore Operations Director and Sitecore MVP at AmericanEagle.com. Personalization. Is it a buzzword? Is it an opportunity to optimize how you reach your site visitors? Is it something most companies want to do but don't know exactly where they're going to start? The answer to most of those questions is yes. Personalization can be the golden ticket to reaching your target audience at the right place and the right time. But as I've said many times before, trying to talk to too many people on your website can lead to not really talking to anyone at all. So the goal is to create an experience for your users that enhances their specific journey, but ultimately helps them convert where you need them to. Throw healthcare into the mix there, and you have yourselves quite a recipe of possibilities, but also considerations. On today's episode, we'll be meeting with Sitecore's Senior Project Manager, Ellen Kirsh, Senior Solutions Architect, Jason Dilday, and our Senior Conversion Rate Optimization Strategist, Sarah Gaughan, key members from our AmericanEagle.com team who have helped plan and execute personalization strategies for our clients that help accelerate the creation of meaningful experiences that are tailored to that focused group. We'll be discussing just what it takes to plan, strategize, execute, and track personalization with considerations to make as you do so, most recently with a large healthcare client of ours. Ellen, Jason, Sarah, welcome to the water cooler.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Well, personalization, definitely one of my favorite topics. I feel like even when I initially got involved in the Sitecore space, that was one of my first days. I remember John talking about personalization and just the different attributes of having certain hero banners change and things like that based on website visits. And I thought, wow, that is cool, shooting us into the future. And that was back in 2017. So here we are now. But before we kind of talk a little bit about just kind of where we should start with personalization, I want to hear from you guys about just kind of names, roles, involvement in AmericanEagle.com before we get started. Ellen, I know you've been on this podcast quite a few times, but Jason, Sarah, this is your first time at the water cooler. So Jason, can you give us a little intro just about who you are, what your involvement is in the Sitecore team?
Yes, thank you. I've been with American Eagle for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was actually working for Sitecore as an architect, developing very large solutions for a lot of Fortune 500 clients. For many years, involved in personalization under the older XM, XP, and now the CDP Personalize. So, thank you.
Very cool. You've been in the Sitecore space for quite some time. And then Sarah, how about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Sarah, and I am the head of our conversion rate optimization team here at AmericanEagle.com. I've been with American Eagle for about 4 years now, and I've been working with a wide range of clients that specialize in anything from e-commerce to clients that are focusing a little bit more on lead generation. Some of the key elements that I focus in on are trying to get people engaging a little bit more with the site and ultimately converting in whatever way is meaningful to you. If that's a phone call, a form submission, or a purchase, trying to figure out better ways to speak to the client, getting them to feel confident in providing information over to your team and getting them to convert.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Jason. And Sarah, I definitely like the fact that we've been working a lot more with you lately, too, because as noted, you're not specifically just in our Sitecore space. You get to work on a plethora of platforms and stuff, but you got to kind of bring a view into personalization that isn't specific to the tool set, which I think is really important, too, because it allows us to take a step back and really focus on what are we trying to achieve and then figuring out, okay, how are we going to get the tool to help us to achieve that? So I think that's really important. And I think one thing I've hit on probably quite a few times on this podcast is the importance of kind of planning and strategizing. And again, not to necessarily dive too deep into that and feel like you never get out of strategy, but to also just understand that the more you kind of plan things ahead of time, the better and more streamlined that execution actually is. So when we talk about personalization, I really want to get to the bare bones of, okay, well, where does a team start, right? And one of the things that, shout out to Adeline Ashley from Sitecore, she's helped us quite a bit on, especially in our kind of healthcare space, is really just kind of doing these personalization workshops. And a lot of time we really take it back to the basics of just goal-driven planning. And I know that sounds very high level, but it's one of those things of really just getting to the bare bones of, okay, identify what your business goals are. Maybe again, for a healthcare client, it's you want to increase membership to a certain plan that's on your site. And so really just kind of figuring out that your goal right there, regardless of personalization, is to increase membership. Then taking it a step further and really just starting to think about, all right, well, what can be done on the website? Again, regardless of personalization, what can we do? What are activities that are on the site that are going to help us achieve this? And then taking it one step further and figuring out, okay, well then how can that actually be achieved within personalization itself? One of the things that we've always focused on in kind of those first activities is really just defining what those key metric goals for your organization are. And then we kind of break it out into figuring out, okay, well, if we're going to take this one step further with personalization, what are maybe key indicators for personalization that actually match that goal? So if it's a goal that's on the website of, again, increasing membership, maybe it's about web behavior and that they're going to specific pages. So it's marking down, okay, then let's start thinking about if a user is going to certain pages, let's put them in this personalization bucket, set up a rule to show this kind of personalization use case. But then another one is then just marketing campaign specific and things like that. And that's where, again, Sarah and her team kind of come in. So again, we think about personalization from the standpoint of taking it very bare bones. Don't think about the tool set. Don't necessarily start to even think about what the personalization is, but just really think about what are the goals that you're trying to actually achieve. But Ellen, is there anything that maybe from your experience are things to maybe consider when you're actually starting out with personalization planning?
I think one of the big ones is everybody gets personalization and it's this really cool feature and you just are excited about the fact that you have it and you have all of these goals and you're right, that's always the first step. But I think a big thing to think about is that not everything has to be solved through personalization. So you have all of your website goals and you need to identify which ones are good use cases for it. So I think starting with the goals is really important and then working your way backwards towards the solutions, because personalization can use and do kind of whatever you need it to do. So it can use data that you explicitly know about me, Ellen Kirsh, as a user, or it can use data because I know that you're located in this time zone. I know you are visiting on Tuesday. I know you've been checking out our articles. So kind of pieces like that, just knowing the breadth of options you have is really important to figure out, what is actually a certified or good use case.
Definitely.
A couple other things I'd say to consider or just keep in mind is you don't have to start out with the most complicated use case. You want to make sure you're getting use of your tool from the beginning, and it's really easy to get trapped in our really exciting big use cases. But it's useful for all sorts of things. It can limit your content management. If you're just you always have something that you have to post on Tuesdays, you can set that up to be an automated process. You can start small and get really big with it, which is I think something to keep in mind because people's first thought is always to go big. A couple other things is, I think you mentioned it, but data. Getting set up first and foremost, you can get set up and start collecting really good data before or kind of while you're goal setting. And that's going to be a big piece to be able to track as you go on and just to know where and how to start.
Yeah.
And then I guess final thing I'll say to keep in mind is team bandwidth is always really big. Again, there's always these lofty goals, which are great to have, but just making sure that you have the operations set up to make sure that can happen. So if you're leveraging campaigns, if you're doing anything like that, then you have the team that has the time and ability and knowledge to be able to use personalization as best it can.
Definitely. And I think that's a really good point too, because I think it goes back to your point as well about you don't have to always do the most complex use case, right? It's nice to plan those things out. And of course you're like, wow, I want it to do all of these crazy things and, and planning out that strategy. But I think it's important to note that you can iterate off of that stuff. You can do the easier use cases. You can do kind of more of the, just strict pop-ups or things like that, that will become inherent with, tools like Sitecore Cloud and Personalize. But that being said, yeah, it ties directly into the bandwidth of your team. And I think that's part of why a lot of organizations will want to do personalization, but then it falls short. It falls flat because they are trying to do too many complex use cases, or they just look at the entire plan and they're like, wow, there's so many things. But then they try to marry that up with their own internal team's bandwidth. And then it just is like, well, we don't have time for this. So that's definitely something to consider is, do the planning and things like that. But try to pick out the ones that are kind of more of your quick wins, because that'll also get your marketing teams and maybe the teams that aren't involved necessarily with the website more excited about personalization as well. So I think that's important. And I think it's a good thing that you hit on too about the data and the tracking, right? And that kind of leads right into you, Sarah, just because I think twofold, right? The one thing that I think is really important is the idea behind setting up personalization with marketing campaigns. All organizations already have things like email campaigns and things like that are already running. And you can set personalization rules up to be just behind like parameters in a URL so that email campaigns and things like that your team is already sending out can actually get that personalization flare set up with it, which I think is really nice. And actually kind of one of those areas that could be considered a quick win because, again, you're already doing it. So just set up the personalization rule around the URL that you put in that CTA in the email and you're good to go. But then also just a matter of kind of tracking and things like that too. So Sarah, just over to you when we are planning this stuff out. Thoughts around maybe different like channels that you can kind of leverage, or maybe doing some things to consider in terms of, okay, we know our personalization use cases, but how do we want to set up tracking and stuff around it? Like just where does your planning fit in while we're doing kind of some of the Sitecore planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a few different things that we consider in terms of what channels we want to bring in to personalization. Ultimately, I would say that channel strategy is all about audience alignment, not necessarily volume. So too often you do see marketers chase every single possible channel and want to over personalize every single experience for a user based off of everything that they're prioritizing on their marketing team.
It goes back to my mantra again. I say this all the time, but if you try to talk to too many people on your site, you end up confusing everybody and you're not really talking to anybody. So that makes complete sense.
That's exactly right. So what we really advocate for here is advocating for a very strategic focus. You want to pick channels where your audience is active, where your messaging is going to resonate based off of what they've seen previously or experienced previously from your brand. And you want to prioritize those channels where the outcomes will be measurable, like Ellen mentioned. So there's a few different routes that we can take when we are looking to personalize an experience on the website. First being that of website or web behavior. So we can set some behavioral triggers on a website, such as targeting people based off of the pages that they visited. For a big healthcare client, we can consider targeting people from those users that are clicking on a dental coverage plan or learning more about mental health. Anyone that is viewing any of those pages, we can decide to show more relevant content through call to actions, hero banners, messaging across the site that we know and are confident will resonate with those audience members that they've shown previous interest in these topics. So we know that we'll score in other areas of the site and resonate with them well there. Another way that we can go ahead and target people on the website would be more so segment-based. So we can target people whether or not they are a new visitor or a returning user. So there's very different intents behind those two groups. New users, we really want to differentiate right out of the gate and show our worth, show our brand, and make people feel confident in us as a company. Versus a returning member, we might be able to show more of the triggers for people that are like visiting specific pages or interested in certain elements of your site. And then the last way that we can go ahead and target people on the website side is through geolocation. So we can show content relevant to their region or local providers in this case for a large healthcare client. And one way that we actually advised people to tap into locations is if we're targeting people to come to a specific event that we're hosting. We want to make sure that we're pushing that messaging out to people that are local to the area and to people that we are confident that we can, connect with in person. So there's that whole website side that we can go ahead and tap into with personalization. And then there's also the digital marketing side. So on most digital marketing teams, you'll see a lot of marketing teams run paid ads, have email campaigns going out. We can tap into all of these audiences as well and use them within personalization too. The first being a paid campaign or an ad. So we can target people based off of the ads that they were shown or the content that was viewed. So you might think of like a Google PPC ad or a social media ad. As you set up those ads, as your marketing team does set up those ads, there's audience targeting tied to those already, such as people targeting based off of location, age, broad demographics, or even like interest-based audiences. So we might be already tapping into certain interest groups through those ads that we can actually leverage on the website through personalization. So on the digital marketing side, that's available there too.
There's a lot. And I think that that's a good point too, because I think, again, we go back to talking about, personalization at times, while it seems very exciting, can be overwhelming. And the digital marketing side really allows for you guys to see that these are areas that your team's already budgeting for. These are things that your team is already working on, whether it is PPC, whether it is email campaigns, whatever it is. So it's like these are activities that you don't have to plan additional budget and bandwidth for. Your team's already doing it. It's really just, okay, well, what personalization use cases can we tie into that of just having, certain things kind of set up? So I think that's just one of those areas that, again, we talk about people feeling overwhelmed sometimes with personalization. This is stuff that your team's already budgeted for. They've already got the bandwidth for because you're rolling out these campaigns already. So really take those campaigns, take a look at them and understand, could personalization be leveraged here? Can we actually set up, again, URL parameters and things like that to put into those campaigns that allow for more segmented audiences to really see content that's a little bit more catered to them when they go to the site.
And that can happen prior to any implementation with a logged in state. So prior to some of the technical foundation or groundwork that you have to lay, you can target people. I know exactly who you are. I'm sending you a campaign. We've interacted before. And so without having that logged in state or needing to know really much about them as a website user, I can know who you are as a person, as an audience member of my website.
Personalization is all about making the most of the audience that you already have.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it also can kind of help too, especially if we're thinking about healthcare from kind of an internal politics area, right? You talk about the fact that healthcare specifically, there's a lot of service lines, there's a lot of different, providers and things like that. And especially from a service line perspective, every service line's the most important, right? But it depends on who you talk to. So that's where, when it comes from even just setting up things like navigation items or whatever it is, you're always going to have people that are like, well, again, my business line's or my service line's more important. But you can utilize things like personalization to kind of help feed into, okay, well, we'll make it more important to the people and the audiences that it is the most important to. We'll make sure that it's kind of top of the line, but you don't have to necessarily cater every area of the website to one specific journey or audience. So I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, I just want to touch on something Ellen said earlier. It's data collection is key. And though the product is configured very well out of the box, what you'll find is if you're a larger client that supports multiple languages, it's important to get in front of that. Because if you don't go ahead and configure that early, you miss out on some very key data collection that Sarah would need later as part of the planning process. And you certainly want, to Sarah's point and Maggie's point, not jump ahead and just try to over personalize without coming with a plan, because you want to maximize the use of your developer hours, because they have to get involved as part of that process.
Definitely. So I guess obviously we kind of broke down planning considerations, how you really kind of get started with planning out personalization. But now that you've maybe done some of the planning, how do you really pick where to start? So again, one thing that we've, been able to do with clients, and again, shout out to Adeline for helping through this as well, but is a kind of quadrant exercise. So you kind of go through the scenarios of picking out your top goals, and maybe how you can leverage Personalize to help you. But then again, there's this whole plan in place and you're thinking through all of these different scenarios, but you want to start picking out the ones that you can prioritize to start with. So when we have this kind of quadrant exercise that we've done with teams, it's really just breaking things down in an area where what is going to give you the highest impact, but really kind of fall into more of the low effort ones, the quick wins. Again, we talked about team bandwidth and really understanding like what does the team actually have time to do, not just from a development standpoint, but like, personalization comes with content creation. There's certain things like that. So, from an operational standpoint, what's going to have the lowest effort but actually have the highest impact. So whether it's again driving people to a certain event, maybe you're really trying to get, attendees up, that would be considered something that's high impact and worth kind of spending the time on. Then there's the ones that maybe when you take a look at it, they're going to require a lot of effort and they're not really going to have a ton of impact. Still some impact. There's still a goal, but it's just maybe the, juice isn't worth the squeeze, as they say. And then, obviously the low effort, low impact ones, you're just going to kind of push to the side. But then there's also room for the ones that are high effort, but high impact. And those are the ones that they should still be put into your backlog. They should still be ones that you're considering because they have high impact for a reason. You're figuring out that they have high impact. And just because they may take a little bit longer and may take a little bit more coordination doesn't mean that they're ones that shouldn't be considered. But again, kind of putting things into that quadrant really helps you to look at that area that are the low effort, high impact ones. What are the quick wins? And those are the ones that are really easily going to be the ones to start with because again, it gets the excitement going about personalization without overwhelming the team and then having you just push personalization completely to the side. So I think that's one of the things that once you kind of put things into those quadrants, it helps you to really clearly see which ones are the ones to kind of start with. And then you kind of break them down into more of that tactical approach. Now you have your kind of post-its, if you will, of like the goals that you're trying to hit and the personalization effort that might be tied to it. But Ellen, once we maybe get out of an exercise like that prioritization, what happens next in terms of maybe the kind of tactical approach to actually getting you to personalization?
I think a couple things are important to identify. So, that first piece is we have our quadrant that is low effort and high impact. And I think one of the biggest things there is enabling the team themselves to be able to implement goals like that. A lot of those being low effort means that it doesn't require development effort. And Sitecore has been really good about allowing content authors to be capable of implementing personalized experiences themselves. So I think number one is probably just training and making sure that the team is equipped to be able to implement some of those low impact or low effort activities on their own. And then a couple other things to think about are with some of the higher effort pieces, what does that look like? Which team bears that onus? So like, for example, for this client that we're talking about here, they were using UTM parameters on their campaigns, and those weren't standardized across any of their campaigns. So part of the tracking and part of being able to utilize their existing marketing teams was having to standardize that. And that's a little bit more difficult to put in a roadmap because they have all of their other priorities, whereas our project is solely focused on them. So that's kind of one of those longer term roadmap items, whereas some of the development and some of our things that we need to know or we know we need to start working on right away, like making sure that we are collecting any of the custom data needed to track events or personalization scenarios after they happen. Like that's something we need to start with right off of the gate. And then you come to some of your or high effort, high impact personalization scenarios, which require more development of new components and pieces like that. And you have to figure out where which team is bearing the labor and which pieces and kind of just stagger them in a way that makes sense and a way that both teams have the time and bandwidth and effort to make happen.
To make it successful, for sure. And then it's, again, goes back to planning that roadmap out, right? It's like, you don't want to throw out the ideas that are high effort just because you're like, well, this is going to take us a while. It's really just, but I think you hit on a great point that it's also seeing what team it's actually going to have the highest effort for, because maybe something that is high effort for the development team won't be too much effort from the like marketing and content writing team. So they could kind of get started on some of that stuff now, or vice versa. Like it could be that it's going to be a lot of effort for the content team and the marketing team, not a ton of effort from the development team, but it's something that's good to know that the development team really shouldn't work on it then for a little while, because it's going to take some time to kind of build that stuff up. So that's where it comes into play in terms of road mapping, prioritizing, and then again, going back to kind of picking the ones that are good to start with, especially to your point, empowering the client and the organization for the ones that it's easy for them to just set up. They're not reliant on a development team. They're not reliant on even maybe their own internal teams and stuff like that. It's something that if you're just a day-to-day user of the platform and user of Sitecore, you can just go ahead and kind of set these things up. So again, those are kind of some more of those low effort, high impact ones. I think it's important too that, while you're going through some of the planning and picking out which ones to start with, you want to start thinking about how you're going to actually track that progress, right? And so again, that's Sarah, where you kind of come in, because I think a lot of times people will set up personalization goals, personalization use cases, but then it's like, well, how do you actually see if they're working, right? Like, how do you know that this is something that's fruitful for the team, that or maybe we need to change the content around or something like that. So, Sarah, can you talk a little bit about just kind of identification and maybe some progress tracking things to consider or plan for as you're getting down to the more like tactical side of setting up personalization?
Absolutely. So we've already mentioned we do want to keep a pulse on a lot of these important metrics. We want to make sure that we already have tracking in place, so we have something to compare back to, compared to when the personalization efforts do roll out. How successful are we with getting people to sign up, getting people to go ahead and make a purchase, and have that comparison benchmark to refer back to. What we land on, especially for the industry of healthcare, these data-informed decisions are the differentiator and are the key to keep personalization tactics moving and A/B testing tactics moving. It is not enough to just track clicks and opens on your site. It's important to emphasize the metrics that are leading to meaningful outcomes as well. So in our case here, it might be membership enrollment completion. So people that are signing up on that form. It might be downloads. It might be phone calls. We need to identify those from the jump that we want to set as key goals and make sure that we are tracking them along the way with personalization. Those key metrics that I'm listing, the calls, the form submissions, these are considered primary metrics. They're leading to meaningful, significant outcomes. And those are the metrics that we do really want to prioritize. There are also those secondary metrics. I mentioned it's not just enough to just track clicks on a call to action button. However, it is something that does signal how people are engaging on the site and whether or not our messaging is landing with them. So those elements we do also want to track. They'll just be more so listed as secondary metrics to keep a pulse on how people are engaging with the topic at hand and with the site. So overall, we want to make sure that we are tracking those primary metrics that tie into our key goals, and we want to make sure that we are tracking some of those clicks that lead up to those key goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think too, it almost sounds like, anybody who's gone through a redesign before, you're setting up KPIs and things like that before you're even diving into making sure that there's ROI just on the redesign. Now it's just taking it a step back to like when you're setting up personalization stuff. It's good to have those things, because then you can quickly iterate on the personalization use cases if you don't feel like they're hitting those KPIs. I also think then, to your point, it's good that when you're breaking these kind of use cases down to more of like those tactical user stories that we talked about, and just, now you understand what you want to do and why you want to do it. Figuring out the how you're going to do it is where the technical team comes in. But then also defining early on, okay, now we know how we're going to do it, but how are we going to track it, I think is important. And it really hits on what you were just mentioning. So I think that's a really key piece to personalization too, and just making sure that your team sees what you're getting out of it and stuff, and then understanding a little bit about, hey, okay, well, maybe this isn't working this way, but we can quickly iterate on it because it isn't just a big website redesign. It's a smaller use case that can really be added to. So no, that's great. Um, okay, so we've obviously talked through a little bit of kind of the planning of personalization. We've talked now about just kind of how do you pick where to start with it. And just again, breaking down kind of more the brass tacks around tactical approach and things. But now we talk more about, again, that how, right? You've defined the what you want to do, why you want to do it. But now it's a little bit more of, okay, how are we going to actually execute this? And this is where we bring in kind of the technical teams. So, Jason, I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about that technical approach. And I think one thing that we've hit on quite a bit here is, again, not biting off more than you can chew when it comes to personalization, and really kind of understanding that you can start with those quick wins to really see what your team wants to grow into. And I think talking Sitecore specifically, XM Cloud has inherent personalization that teams can use to kind of get their feet wet before they really dive into kind of more of the Personalize and CDP roadmaps. So, Jason, can you talk a little bit just about like how XM Cloud faces against Personalize in terms of just maybe some of the key things that will come out of the box just with Sitecore XM Cloud?
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, the good news is for those trying to reduce how much you bite off at once. The XM Cloud Page Builder, a great UI for new UI for building pages, has organically built into the Page Builder the ability to personalize pages, everything from individual components to entire pages, or the entire page, however you want to do it. And it also comes with a lot of really good out of the box conditions for specifying when these should trigger. Um, where where CDP and Personalize start to differ is that CDP Personalize expands on those conditions. There are additional ones you can add. You can do your own custom conditions. And the really cool part about this is work that you do with CDP and adding custom conditions comes right back into XMC. So if you do a custom condition that's specific to your business space, then when you go back into the page builder in XMC, that condition's available to you. And it's a great way of short stepping into the next, level of personalization.
Yeah, that
And if it all
nice
seems like
slick page builder that you're talking about. I think plenty of our clients would agree with you on that. But yeah.
oh yeah, great feature. And if the whole thing seems like it's starting to act a little bit seamless to you, it has a lot to do with the fact that not many people know this, but there's a little miniature version of CDP Personalize running in the background supporting XMC, and that's how it's working. That's why when you buy the product for CDP and you create a custom action, it just suddenly magically, or conditioning, and magically shows up in XMC. There was a reason for that. So it's a great seamless integration of the two products. They work very well hand in hand. There are differences, right, in how you build your personalizations. XMC, obviously, with the page builder, love that. But then there's the original traditional personalized CDP way of building experiences with custom pop-ups or overlays or fly-ins. And they work, based on the same concepts of the conditions that are available to both. And you can take it a step further for some more advanced scenarios in the CDP when you come up with your own experiments like A/B testing and other advanced features. So, yeah, great question.
Yeah, and I think that again goes back to what we were talking about early on, right? That there's use cases that you can kind of plan out, and to what you just spoke on, like maybe some of the more complex ones that would involve like a CDP or, using the rules set up with Personalize are ones that can be a little bit later in the roadmap versus ones that go right out the door with what's inherent with XM Cloud. And that also depends on the organization, because some organizations are just ready to hit the ground running with Personalize and they have all of these plans in place, and that's where it makes sense for them to kind of roll that in right away. So I think that's great.
I think just worth mentioning as well as is XM Cloud does out of the box have really good options and some of those like bare bones use cases that you can use. But the big thing or the big advantage of getting Personalized in CDP is what we've been saying the whole podcast, which is data.
Yep.
You can't
Yes.
get or track or have any data that backs what you've been doing with Personalize in XM Cloud, but CDP and Personalize are really where that comes into play.
Right. So it's again kind of getting your feet wet, getting your team excited about kind of setting up personalization, maybe use cases with XM Cloud. But again, to your point, being able to actually kind of track that, see what's happening, set up specific conditional rules and things like that too, really is going to be where you kind of grow into Personalize and CDP. So that makes a lot of sense. Jason, when it comes to actually planning these things out, and again, we have the technical team involved in some of the early workshops too, but really once it starts to get to that tactical approach that we talked about with Ellen and really defining those user stories, that's when we really try to bring you guys in to make sure that we're figuring out, okay, again, we've understood what we're trying to accomplish, but how are we going to do it? That's where your team comes in. Any technical considerations to think about? I know earlier you even mentioned like the stuff with different like multi-language and making sure that configurations are set up properly and things like that. Like, are there any technical considerations that you think would be worth noting as somebody's maybe planning out specific use cases or just personalization in general?
I think as part of the planning stage, it might be useful to involve the dev team in adding some of those custom events so that Sarah can see the data coming in and then make the better informed plan decision. So we might show up a little early, but in some of these events to capture the data that they need to see, they look at it, they analyze it, and then we'll come back in later and either through the page builder personalization, if that makes sense to do it there, or if there's something very custom that they need to handle with a form, perhaps that's taken care of with CDP, but those decisions are made based on the early custom JavaScript events that the developers will put in for the data capture for Sarah.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, I think that's important too, because again, when we're talking through use cases and things like that, obviously when we get down to how we're going to do it, it's important to make sure that those technical considerations are things that you're thinking about ahead of time. So when we're talking about, growing into, okay, you've done maybe some of the very initial use cases with XM Cloud, but now you're kind of getting into more of a area where you're adopting Personalize and using that tool more. What can you talk about that comes maybe out of the box with Personalize versus what maybe is something that you would do like a custom extension for or things like that?
Right. So out of the box, Personalize allows a lot of things like pop-up boxes, alert banners, flyouts, anything that's visual that can be added to the page. It could be anything from prompting a user to, hey, we've seen that you purchased a certain item, upgrade to premium for X number of dollars. Click this button, like a call to action, and try to get users to go in that direction to spend more money and those sorts of cases. Or it could just be something as simple as an alert banner, like you changed your insurance plan, and by the way, you realize that this plan does not cover something you expressed an interest in the previous. So very useful for stuff like that. Anything from forms to alerts to call to actions, that anything that would be interactive that you could get a user to do, or even maybe even send an email. Like there's something that happened that was an interaction you wanted to capture, and part of that journey was to send an email to say, thanks for visiting the site. We've noticed you left left items in your cart you didn't purchase. You want to come back and look at those. So the sky's the limit to this sort of stuff.
Too much. I get them all the time.
Yeah, that's
too much online
or
shopping
text.
for me.
Or text.
No,
I get text.
I block those texts, Jason. Okay.
I block them too.
Yeah, right. All right. So, we've talked about XM Cloud personalization, then talked a little bit more about the personalized tool. But what if a client wants to purchase CDP, customer data platform for those who don't know? But if they were to purchase that tool as well, how does that take things one step further?
Well, the good news about CDP is that it preserves your analytics data for all time. So from the day you started collecting data for CDP until, infinity. And you get access to dashboards, you get access to data segmentation and basically basic querying. You can, sort of just look at your raw data and try to look for patterns. Lots of analytics tools, and of course, again, the longevity of the data. And if you have a very long running personalization that needs to extend months for some reason or another, CDP will facilitate that. So
Great.
you're really missing out if you don't buy it.
Yeah, of course, it enhances the experience. It enhances the tool to have CDP. And it is one thing to note that Personalize and CDP, again, they run agnostically. So you could, if you already have a CDP platform, you don't necessarily have to use Sitecore. So it's one of those things where if inherently your organization already has a tool set that's collecting that data, it can tie directly into Personalize and it's not an inhibitor. So that's always good to kind of know. So one of the things that I kind of want to wrap up with, because we've obviously talked about kind of planning personalization and then actually implementing it and things like that. And we've talked a little bit about just kind of sprinkling in doing this with our large healthcare client. But when thinking about personalization in the healthcare space, the opportunities are, again, exciting and endless, but they do come with the fear of staying HIPAA compliant, right? I think the great news being that Sitecore's XM Cloud, Personalize, and CDP are all HIPAA compliant and BA ready. But beyond the tooling, what are things to consider in planning that can help kind of maybe ease this worry for healthcare clients that do want to get involved in personalization?
Well, the first step is to be very careful to deliberately not tie your, let's say, a login member portal experience to CDP, because if you do, then that's when you risk capturing things that you don't want to capture. And obviously, when you're planning out your personalization, you just have to keep, first and foremost, front of mind, is the data that I'm collecting, can that be used in some way to uniquely identify a person, which would clearly be what we'd not want to do. And to try to really focus your personalizations towards things that occur in the current session. So while they're browsing the site, how they've been browsing it. And if they just disappeared and came back on a different device, you wouldn't know who they were. Doesn't matter. You're personalizing based on how they're interacting with the site at that moment, and you keep the anonymity.
And that's a big reason that Sarah and her team have been so helpful on this, is because, you can't use logged in information and all this great information you do have about somebody, but what you have is campaign segments. And you have information that you're allowed to use about people without identifying them personally. But I know that you are a member of this plan, that you're over 65 years old, that these are some of the needs based on who you are in our marketing campaigns. And so that's been really helpful to bring your team in for that.
Yeah, and I think also too, one thing that you guys definitely did when you were planning out a lot of this personalization stuff with our healthcare client is to really just, work closely with their teams, with their internal legal teams, their privacy policy teams, et cetera, to make sure that, again, while the tool sets that Sitecore has rolled out are HIPAA compliant, which is great, and you have that backing, it's another layer to just rest yourself assured that you're working with the teams that you do have to make sure you're staying in compliance with, to know that they're a part of that journey, they're a part of that planning, and they're kind of vetting things out as you would be rolling them out. So I think it's one thing to say that we'll wrap things up here with that personalization. It can be exciting, it can be overwhelming at times, but if you plan it out well and you plan it out in a space where, again, you're kind of facing that HIPAA compliance, it really can set yourself up for success, your team up for success in terms of being able to kind of segment those audiences and make sure that you're meeting people at the journey that you want to and getting them to, again, ultimately down that funnel to convert. Ellen, Jason, Sarah, thank you for joining us at the Sitecore Water Cooler today. I look forward to collaborating with you guys in the future, and we hope to have you back on the Water Cooler again soon.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thanks for listening to the Sitecore Water Cooler podcast. Find out more information about AmericanEagle.com's Sitecore services and today's topic in the description below. This episode is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. I'm your host, Maggie Burke, and special thanks to our executive producers, Renee Nelson, Julia Klepich, and Brian Winger.